Well, we can start off with Jim. It was awesome seeing you, Pat, and Ryan live in Dallas. Thank you so much for coming. And it was just a lot of fun and a lot of buzz about SaaS alerts there. So it was cool.
First of all, Andrew, it was unbelievable event. Congrats. I mean, I remember when you first started, before the first event, you were talking about this, and the fact that you've built to what it is today is awesome. It's a great accomplishment. And I know that it's going to be way bigger in the future, and it should be. Because for those on this call that weren't at Write Boom, it has become the conference for cybersecurity in the MSP ecosystem. And if you haven't been there, you can't appreciate how awesome it is. Everyone is, single. They're focused so much on just making their businesses better with regards to cybersecurity and protecting their customers and driving the revenue that comes along with that. I've never been to a show that has just got such focus, and it makes a big difference in terms of the quality of the event. So great job, Andrew. I'm just ecstatic to be a part of it.
Thanks, bud. I appreciate it. It was awesome. Like I said, just hearing everything. Adam, I don't know if we're going to be going to the UK. We had people from Netherlands, New Zealand, and Australia. So I'm going to hope that you come to us before we get over there. It's hard enough putting on one show, let alone globally, but maybe we'll get there one day.
I'm pushing Andrew, folks, to actually allow more people. He capped it this year at 500, and he ended up letting some more people in at 560, Andrew, something like that.
Just under 570.
Yeah. And I'm like, Andrew, you could have like 2,000 people here if you wanted next year. And he's like, I don't know, maybe we should keep it smaller. I'm like, I think it's going to be up to you. Whatever you want the number to be, that's what the number will be. That's how good it is.
Oh, thanks. I really appreciate it. My head's getting too big.
Andrew, I vote for the UK on the Tuesday following the Open Championship.
Okay. As long as you're putting it on, Chip, I'm there with it. Okay, let's do it. So agenda, I want to put in first and foremost in the chat. If you missed it, I'm putting in here the Creds and the Kill Chain webinar. Michelle, I'm sure you've shared it out far and wide, but we did that earlier this week on Tuesday, and Chip was the star, along with Craig Riddle, the former director of identity and access management for HP. And what was awesome about it was both Chip and Craig were very in sync in terms of where they see authentication going. I'll let Chip give his perspective, but it's not often that you get somebody like a Craig Riddle who how to protect it in an enterprise the size of HP, who can distill down, like when you watch it, he just brings things really down into something that's very understandable, which is not easy to do. He's now the acting field CISO for Netrex. But love your thoughts on it, Chip.
Yeah, look, I thought it was a terrific webinar. Interesting coming, so quickly on the heels of Write Boom and the comment from CISA regarding MFA adoption. That kind of led into the whole thing, and it's really staggering to me that it's as low as it is. I know I used the number of 32% among SaaS Alerts partners customers. It's actually 31.78, so we were rounding up a little bit to make us feel better. But what caught me the most was Craig's view, and I shared the view that we really need to move toward a passwordless authentication universe. There are applications that I use outside of Microsoft and G Suite, other products that I use that only do passwordless authentication, and I love it. At first it seems like a nuisance that you sign in with your credential And then you've got to get an email or a passcode immediately, but it's always a one-time thing. There's no password to get jacked. And I think that really is the future. Craig talked a lot about ephemeral identity. I don't know if any of you guys have started looking into where that could lead us. It's a complicated problem in a world where the account name and the email address are effectively the same thing for our primary directory services. But nevertheless, I think it's, you know, those two things, passwordless and ephemeral identity, are definitely the future that we'll find ourselves in, and will have a big impact on security. The other thing I was really pleased about is, you know, Craig was also in agreement with my take on the simplest thing that companies can do is adopt the advice that Microsoft is now giving across all their applications. Don't have users change passwords. Just go with long passphrases that are very difficult to crack. You know, 16 characters would be, you know, my personal minimum. The advice on the street is 12 characters is adequate, 8 characters is useless. You know, I think going to a 16 character phrase is pretty easy for almost anyone to remember. And just make it something that isn't, you know, doesn't include your personal information, birth dates, that kind of stuff that people can fish for and find out. But I thought all in all, it was a terrific webinar. We had some good questions as well.
Yeah. It was awesome. Thank you for doing it, Chip. We'll do more of that stuff. All right. Second thing on the agenda is, did anybody do anything with Commercial Insights? We've had a few weeks off. I'm hoping, Jim, we see some yes, and here's a success story, but I'm gonna say I'm gonna hold my breath for maybe here. That's about it. But does anybody have anything they want to share? Anybody do anything with their Commercial Insights since we last met? Let's see. I'm looking for hand raises, Jim. I'm not seeing any. So I'm going to take it as everybody's done the homework and they're killing it. They just, you know, just keeping it all humility to themselves.
That's got to be it, Andrew.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we'll come back more to that. And I'm excited because, you know, I think you're going to, you know, when we talk about the SASE report, we're going to give insights into that today, Jim. I think you guys are probably going to talk insights within that when it gets released, which is a really cool thing that you did. All right, Chip, back to you and Liron. Anything on the product side that you either want to share that maybe whether it was, you know, some small updates and or input you've gotten or anything potentially coming?
Yeah, I'll let Liron give an update on the product stuff. There definitely are some changes. Some of them are rather visible that you guys may have already noticed. But when that concludes, I do want to have a discussion with the panel, with the partners about an announcement we made, I think 2 weeks ago, regarding timeouts in the browser. So we want to get some feedback. But Liron, you want to take folks through what's been updated most recently in the app since our last call? I think that we skipped last week, right?
We did.
Yep.
I would have done it, Chip, but you were skiing.
Yeah. I gotta take
Andrew,
a break once in a while. So.
And Andrew was busy talking to the executive director of CISA. So.
All right, Liron. Any are you gonna do some screen sharing potentially, or?
I mean, there's nothing really major. We're moving along. We're working on some fairly big ticket items, which I would love to share with you guys, but Chip and Jim just won't allow me to talk about these things. So I can't, unfortunately, but we have changed the styling of the map, which is the first thing that you see when you log into the application. It's just a little bit more updated, and it's going to be a cluster map. It'll display significantly more data than what it is that you see today. Another item of note is that we created an independent Office 365 shell event, which was a result of some lessons that we learned after some breaches had occurred. So what that event is, it is a specific event that occurs when one Microsoft application logs into another application. So when a user goes from Outlook to Word, that creates an inner login between those two applications. And what we've seen, I believe there are two examples of it that we have, is we saw a standalone one of those occur, let's say in Nigeria for an American business. And so therefore it's like, why is that thing happening on its own in Nigeria? That's not normal. So what we've done is we've created it as an independent event. So you are going to start seeing those Office 365 shell events. The problem with those is that they can be rather noisy. As you can imagine, a user jumps from application to application to application. And let's say they're doing it in Nigeria, you're going to get 6 outside of location alerts. So what we are in the process of doing right now is doing some correlation analysis between those application to application logins and user logins in order to understand what the normal behavior is, so that we can create a critical version of an Office 365 shell event. Let's say when it happens as a standalone event in 6 hours, that's obviously not normal, right? Like you first have to log into Microsoft and then you log into the applications. So that's something that we are starting to evaluate and do correlation analysis on.
Awesome.
Yes, I'll make a follow-up comment on that, just in case there's anyone on this call that wasn't on previous calls where we discussed this. The reason this surfaced is because there's a particular kind of token harvesting attack that can occur on any end user, where if they simply click on a link in an email, phishing email, that opens up a secondary tab on their browser. If they have JavaScript enabled, which almost everyone does, that allows for their particular user token to get harvested and then to be used to log into that 365 session with the token. And that's what generates this WCSS event. Funnily enough, we had a third incident which occurred before I left for vacation last week, whereby we had a similar situation happen with a Google account. And we weren't aware that this was necessarily a possible threat vector for Google Workspace. It turned out, and it was in Nigeria again, it turned out that unbeknownst to the customer, one of their employees had actually traveled to Nigeria and was working from Nigeria. But it threw up all kinds of red flags from us, because that's where we've seen this activity in the past. But in doing some research, we discovered that it is actually possible to execute the same kind of token harvesting attack against the Google Workspace account. So something to be aware of for those of you who have Google Workspace customers out there. It's yet another thing that we all have to keep our eyes open for.
Chip, you wanted to, I know, ask a question or kind of get the poll going for our feedback, but Wes has a question. I don't know if you saw it in chat about, so would this highlight bad actor using, Microsoft application to exfiltrate data via this type of an alert?
Yeah, I'm just reading that real quick.
Sure.
I was in the middle of typing the response for that.
Yeah, it absolutely would, Wes. In fact, in the instances that we noticed, the bad actor had access to the account. What they immediately did is, again, I'll bet a few of you guys could guess this, but it seems to be the favorite activity for bad actors when they do get control of an account is they immediately set up email forwarding. And the email forwarding is going outside the organization, and now they're using that as a mechanism to start harvesting other information about the domain, other users in the domain. They obviously have access to the files that user has authority for. The fact that these things are gonna occur, and I think in the end, we're, the best we can do as security professionals is look for them and make our customers aware of them, but also counsel our customers. Make sure that you're practicing the policy of least privilege for all of your users, especially in the data side. Don't give people access to sensitive data just because, you don't want to spend the time to properly organize SharePoint and put people in groups and segment off their roles. It's really critical, knowing that these things can happen, that you minimize the damage as much as possible through good configuration policy.
Good stuff. Great question, Wes. So
And,
Chip,
Andrew, I just wanted to highlight something that Liron said, because we've kind of put we put a muzzle on him in terms of being able to talk about certain things. We are launching, we have a product launch on April 19th. It is just for partners. So we're going to get some information out to everyone on that. But for those on this call, please mark your calendars for April 19th at 1 p.m. Eastern time. We are going to be releasing information about a game-changing module or feature in SaaS Alerts that I know most of you are going to be very excited about. So that's one of the things that Liron can't talk about, but we're going to announce it to partners only the 19th of April, and then the following week at Connect IT Global in Las Vegas, we will announce to the rest of the world.
and on Muzzle Chip at that time. I'm sorry.
And on Muzzle Chip and Liron.
And Liron at the time. Okay.
You know, it's funny. Chip is the one that's actually most paranoid, and he does the most muzzling. with
Okay.
everybody,
Awesome.
just so people know.
Yeah, that's true. Description accepted.
Well, being in Vegas, Jim, and muzzling people sound, kind of serendipitous. So, all right, Chip, did you have something you wanted to chat with the folks here about, just to get some opinions and thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So we discussed a couple of weeks ago that we're going to be introducing a browser timeout on the manage and respond and report apps. And we're doing this as part of a requirement on our journey to ISO certification. We discussed that the time limit that we intended to put on it was 15 minutes. We think that SaaS Alerts, the data that's in SaaS Alerts and the customer information is critical enough that we should take an ultra strict security policy around it. We've had some feedback from the partner community. I mean, out of the 700 or so partners that we have, we've heard from maybe a dozen or so far, and universally they have been, are you kidding me? 15 minutes? Like, you guys are killing us. So, I really want to get some feedback from this group in particular, because you guys all, you take the time to be here every week, most of you, or if you're here for the first time, at least you're interested enough that you realize we want your feedback. And Jim just called me paranoid. He's right. I take the strictest view of everything security-wise as my default position. So I want to hear from you guys as a group. Are we being too restrictive? Is it unreasonable to use a 15-minute timeout? Do we need to make it 30 minutes? I wouldn't go any longer than an hour if you broke my legs, and even that would take 600 over 700 partners demanding it. But I want to throw it out to the floor and get feedback from you guys. And thanks, Scott, for that. Yes, 15 minutes from the last activity, exactly.
I find it reasonable when it comes to the respond module and the alerting platform, but the reporting platform, I believe it should be extended. Because what presentations and talking with the client and having that open when you're in a conversation, and if you're not touching the keyboard and you're doing a presentation, it times out. That's the only feedback I would give.
That's fair.
Thanks, Ryan.
Maybe there could be a dashboard, right? So if our team is
like the reporting one is a different portal technically. I don't know if you're able to change the timeout on just that part of the portal. I mean, there is similar data availability in that you're trying to, it seems like what you're trying to do is keep the exposure of data limited as possible, right? And so, some of that same data is available on the reporting side, but the challenge that I have is, your reports are designed to be relatively interactive. And so either, for us, my preference is to not make them interactive, and then we can run it off of, say, a PDF or a slideshow, and it's not so much of a challenge. But if we're having to be in the portal, that's the thing that we run into a challenge with.
Right. So you're right, Ryan. The reports portal is a different web application by design. And so we can set it differently, and I'm more open to that than to having the respond and the manage app set to a longer interval. So we can definitely consider doing that. Just want to comment on something you said. You are aware that you can take any of the reports and turn them into a PDF right from the
Yeah,
report app.
the challenge is it kind of loses the magic, right? Because the
Yeah,
whole
it
point
does.
is like
I
your
get it.
visualizations allows you to do drill downs, right? And it's just
Right.
Right.
the workflow for us that's a little challenging is that, you know, we've got a lot of reports that we hand over in TBRs on a monthly basis. And so we try to streamline that experience for the customer and for the account rep. And so we've been trying to streamline our reporting apparatus as much as possible. And so the challenge is, you know, the delivery of the report is in a very different cadence than the rest of our reports, because it, you know, it comes in as an email. You've got to sign into it to download the report, and then if you want to make it the PDF version, then it's not as interactive. So like bundling that PDF together with the rest of our reports is not as nice of an experience. And so right now I've been having our account managers using the digital version and having a separate meeting specifically just on SaaS alerts until we can kind of streamline that experience better.
I love that answer.
I do too, because that's exactly what we were hoping for when we
Right.
built it, is that account managers would use the product in exactly that way. So I love it. A
Ryan,
couple of comments,
bravo,
you know,
Ryan. Bravo.
I try to drink the
Couple of comments.
Kool-Aid, but only when it tastes good.
So Tim and Ben, to your comments in the chat, yes, we could create a drop down and then, you know, set a minimum and maximum in that drop down. The truthful answer is that's a lot more complicated to do for us from a technical back end perspective. And I think the feature has value to do that, and we probably will get there, but it's going to take a chunk of time. We've got Liron and the engineering team working on some really big epics at the moment, and I wouldn't want to take them off to creating a variable timeout. But we hear you loud and clear that we can do that in the future. But I'm still getting kind of a mixed read here. Like some people are saying 15 minutes is fine. Ryan, I think your suggestion is a great one. And actually, I'm a little embarrassed that we didn't think of it on our own to set it differently for reports. So, you know, thanks for making me turn red here on a call.
No problem. Anytime.
Yeah. So we'll take that. Any more feedback on, you know, on that particular topic before we jump forward?
My 2 cents is like I've found that I've not had to be in the portal as often because it's kind of designed to not have to sit in the portal all day long by connecting it to our ticketing system. So I'm not finding in the 15 minutes problematic for me, because typically the only time I'm in the portal is during onboarding or doing some, you know, kind of quality control checks. And, you know, 15 minutes, if I'm not in the portal, it's fine. And it logs me out and log back in. I mean, I'm relatively used to that. I appreciate your security first approach. And I think that, you know, 15 minutes is reasonable when it comes to what the data is being exposed on those two parts of the platform.
Yeah, especially respond. That's the one I'm most paranoid about. You know,
and
some of you guys
should
have heard,
be. Yes.
Some of you guys have heard this story, but I'll tell it again for newer partners. It took Jim 9 months to talk me into being even willing to build Respond as a module, just because of the danger that's there in impacting tenants. And I know that there's some things about it that are a pain in the neck to use, like you have to be an admin and some other stuff that we've built in there to make it not so easy to jump in and create a rule that can negatively impact a tenant. So yeah, like back to the paranoia. There you go.
Well, I'll say, like, we're relatively a newer partner in the sense we came on last year, and your precision and detail when it comes to that kind of security approach is what made us go with you as a partner, because there's many other partners that have that kind of automation in their product that see it as a workflow improvement and don't take the security ramifications into account. And so that very much made our decision very easy to choose you guys over other partners because of that and that Respond module. So I really do have to commend you for being willing to kind of push that as much as you did and kind of holding that line about how dangerous that is, because it is kind of the most dangerous part of your platform.
Awesome.
Eric,
Ryan, thank you for recognizing that. And I know how much Chip appreciates that, because he's right. I think it took actually a year of convincing him, not 9 months, to build Respond, but we're there now.
Great comment,
Yeah.
Eric. I
Yeah.
love it. Security with a box of tissues. That's a good one. So Andrew, one other thing that I'm hoping that we talk about, I don't remember if you were going to put this on the agenda today or not, and that's that whole Coinbase article that popped out. Were you going to bring that up today?
Which article?
The Coinbase discussion on their hack.
Oh, we certainly can. Do you want to chat about that real quick and let me bring it up for you, Chip?
Yeah, sure. I'd encourage everyone to read it.
Yeah, it's really well done.
We put the link in chat. Not read it now, but
yes,
there's a couple things in there that really jumped out at me, that they did a fantastic job of describing what went on with a breach that they had, and they made sure to highlight the fact that there are really no systems that are impervious to compromise. It's almost impossible to build that in the software. The only way to do it is to air gap everything and consider all of technology an embedded system. That obviously doesn't work from a convenience standpoint for knowledge workers. But the other thing that really stood out to me is that they didn't shame the people who were involved. They didn't name them, obviously, but they made a point of stating that, look, this can happen to anybody. And they specifically talked about testing and statistical work done on the susceptibility of virtually anyone to social engineering if the social engineering attempt is crafty enough, is targeted enough, even executed on experienced security professionals, it can happen. And I just thought it was a great, honest way that they put out the information about what happened. There's lessons in there for all of us in terms of how we communicate when there is a security breach back to our customers. So it's a worthwhile read.
Yeah, I'll get it in chat, but I thought, again, hats off to them for being so transparent, but then using it as a really, we talk about insights. They literally walk you through the anatomy of what happened and, explain it in a way, providing the TTPs, and it was really, really, as you said, Chip, I think it was really eloquent and good for them for doing it. So let me put this in chat to everybody. Yeah, just a touch, Josh, just a touch.
Well, I'm curious to see your
Wes.
guys' perspective of like the difference between the two disclosures between LastPass and Coinbase. Like, what would you say is your biggest criticism from your perspective
Of LastPass?
of LastPass's disclosure?
Yeah, just my biggest criticism, Ryan, is it's obvious they knew a lot and didn't disclose it in a timely manner. Like,
yeah,
right. But the variable of timely manner is the thing I'm trying to get to.
It was extensive. It was extensive, and the reason to me, it's somewhat egregious, and I mentioned this on the cyber call, is individuals use LastPass as a shadow IT mechanism, not intentionally being deceptive, but have keys to the kingdom for, a lot of their corporate assets, right? And so they knew, LastPass knew it was as bad as it was. And even if it took them a little longer, when you look at when they started disclosing to when they finally said, this is literally what was done, right? And what was known that was the threat actors had access to. I mean, I don't know, how long was it? Like a month, maybe more?
Oh, it was multiple months.
Yeah, multiple, right. Multiple. So I mean, you know, when you have the best of the best, and I forget who it was, when you have a Mandiant in there or somebody like that doing
With
your,
Mandiant.
yeah, doing your digital forensics, I mean, they know.
Because the thing I'd love to do as a community together is come up with a good strategy in the MSP space about disclosure and how do we disclose these things? Because I think this is one of the biggest things that's important for our industry is that for me, like I trust LastPass more that they disclosed it and they've gone through this experience and they're going to improve it rather than believing that because some other vendor that hasn't been breached is more secure. Well, they haven't been tested. No one knows if their security is better because the techniques that were used against LastPass were relatively sophisticated. And there's the challenge of when you disclose something, it's a reputation risk. And so how do you disclose that you had a problem when you first find out you have a problem and then come into the details, you know, within a week, within a month? No, like the cadence of that disclosure, I think as an industry, we haven't really come to terms with. And I'd love to see us as MSPs get better specifically about that one thing, because this is a thing that as MSPs, the smaller businesses don't know how to do this, don't have the resources and the research team to do that communication cadence and or have the ability to have, you know, PR or have the previous relationships to leverage, say, a Mandiant or a legal team to do those types of things, and it ends up falling more on the MSP.
I think you said some amazing things right there, Ryan, but the last piece of what you said, they don't have PR, they don't have quite, you know, communication, they may not have a breach attorney, but this is the biggest opportunity, in my opinion, for MSPs right now. Forgive the coin, the selfless plug here, but this is right of boom services, right? This is the ability to walk a customer through a tabletop, right? You know, it's the, if we called you, or, you know, again, it's to take a third party, right? If Red Canary called you tonight and said, this is going on in your environment, you know, this amount of data has been exfiltrated, all the systems are locked down, walk me through what you would do. You know, I'm air quoting that scenario, Ryan, but you come up with that scenario. Mr. Customer, Mr. Prospect, walk me through what would happen. And that's our opportunity more than ever right now. But to your other point, I'd love Chip or Jim's comment on this.
Because what I'm finding about this is that, you know, each MSP is kind of trying to solve this themselves. And in the security space, there is reluctance to share these types of things with partners because becomes kind of our IP. Like our execution of it becomes kind of the proprietary knowledge of that company. And well, because of that mentality, I feel the bad guys essentially win because we're not willing to collaborate and the bad guys are willing to collaborate. The sad thing is like the hackers are collaborating more than we are. That's why I participate in this call, because like this is one of the very few MSP focused groups that's more about the theory and the execution rather that has technical pieces in it, that is not just a marketing plug for the tool every single call. Right. Like I agree that it's great that we do focus on the product and talk about those things, but you guys do a great job of putting it into a broader context. And that's why I come back every week, or else I've got plenty of other things I could do, but this is very valuable to me because of that.
Yeah.
You know, Ryan,
yeah.
to your comment, I posted a link for everyone in the chat, which is a review of most of the password managers and their breaches and disclosures over the past 6 or 7 years. So it's worth taking a look at. It's not just LastPass. They've all had issues. But we had this discussion this morning with our risk committee meeting. We have a weekly risk committee internal at Sazler's, and we had this very discussion about, you know, what are the safest tools to use. And I've used the analogy in our own team that, you know, if I'm going to fly commercially, I'm going to choose the airline that just had an accident because I know they're going to be the most vigilant. Like, fortunately, that doesn't really happen that much anymore in the airlines, but it's just an example to make the point. I think LastPass did a poor job of disclosing the seriousness of it. And I actually, for me as a software engineer by training, I'm actually still not satisfied with part of their disclosure that just says, you know, they got access to some code. I'd want to know, okay, they got access to some code. You don't have to tell us what the code is, but tell us what is going to change in your product as a result of that code access. And they did a little bit of that. You know, they told you, look, you know, we've expanded the number of iterations for the hash value, and you should go in and change that manually. Here's an knowledge base article to do it, but there's more to it than that. And I would like to see a little more. I think this is a great juxtaposition, what Coinbase did, which was really quickly get an in-depth and honest assessment of what happened, and LastPass dragged it out. Somebody in the comments said, you know, blame the lawyers, and this is a cultural thing that, you know, people who are straightforward and disclose everything get punished. But I think as a community, and you think about what Coinbase does, I mean, you know, A, it's crypto, which has a bad rap as it is right now. B, it's a consumer product essentially. And they seem to have realized that disclosure and honesty is actually going to win in the long run. So hopefully there's an example made here, and that we can set the same examples ourselves, that disclosure actually isn't going to be punished in the future. People are arriving at an awareness that this is the only way we push back on the bad actors in the world, the threat actors in the world.
Yeah, I just want to also thank Ryan for your comments about this call and the fact that you do come every week. And, you know, I have to give all the credit to Andrew, you know, who essentially, he's the one that sets the tone for this. And, you know, we talk every week about what we're going to put on the agenda, and then also talk about the collaboration piece, because I think that is really critical, that the bad guys do collaborate and the good guys tend not to. It's one of the reasons we decided to monitor MSP tools, specifically the RMMs. And right now we've got, you know, Kaseya VSA and Automate and Ninja, and we'll get to all the other ones too. But one of the things that we'll be able to, like, now, if there's a supply chain attack going on within one of those tools, we can see it, right? And then if it crosses over, we can see that, and we can do the reconciliation. And that's one of the ways that I guess we're going to force collaboration amongst vendors, even though they don't have to. We're going to do it for them through our monitoring of their tools, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And Eric and all you said, I just want to be really clear. I'm not blaming somebody for disclosing. I think responsible disclosure is critical. All I'm saying, in the way Chip said it, is how this one dribbled out, right? That's what I'm saying. So I hope that's clear.
And I agree with you. The thing that I think this is a great opportunity to do the case study comparison between the two, because we've got very different experiences and there's a lot to learn lesson wise on, you know, this is not necessarily like our discipline, right? Like, we're more from a technical perspective in the technical space. So learning on how to deal with disclosure and the legality around it is not something I think most technicians are comfortable with or understanding. And, you know, business leaders have reluctance around it. I mean, I find it that you would have expected that a security company would be more experienced in the security aspects of disclosures, because that's their core business. Whereas then we see a financial institution where traditionally they've been reluctant to have disclosures about financial risks and issues in the finance world. But Coinbase is a bit of a disruptor in that industry, and they're doing this so much better than many other partners. Like, you know, banks get breached all the time and they don't disclose things often. And we have some distrust around the whole financial industry because of that. And here's Coinbase trying to change that narrative because of how scary crypto is, and people don't understand it, that they're leading with PR in front. And I think that's what gives them this advantage here on why they were able to disclose better. Whereas LastPass is not, because they're not necessarily disrupting the space or leading with PR or that part of the apparatus up front.
Yeah. Well, I'll close with this we can certainly keep talking about it. I do have a few other things I'd like to cover, but again, I think this all starts with us internally, right? Do we have a tabletop and an incident response plan? Have we gone through a simulated crisis? If we had to tell our customers that, our RMM was encrypted and a huge portion of their, systems are encrypted, like what would that look like? And putting ourselves through that crisis is always a decent place to start. Not fun. I can provide you the resources for it. We've done events on it, but Ryan, I love what you're saying. I really do. I think it's great.
Yeah. And Bob is right too in this comment about, companies selling security products, like SolarWinds originally, or initially, blamed an end user, for bad password management. They didn't want to take full responsibility for what was going on in their own product and how they were actually lackluster in protecting specifically 365.
That was literally the worst I've ever seen.
Yeah.
For a company that size with federal customers, I just, my jaw hit the floor, about how that went down, right? I mean, billions of dollars. They beat the hell out of us as customers about our security, right? I mean, there's a whipping post where all of us customers go to to get flogged by them, and then that happens to them, right? And then and then they try to blame someone else. So that was my point to Ryan, is like, I wish there was like a holy grail about this, where people who did this kind of thing took it seriously. But
yeah, well, things could be changing. Early this morning, Chip sent an article out to me. I forwarded it to Andrew about the legislation. There it is.
Yep.
So ultimately, there'll be legislation that holds software companies and also MSPs, quite frankly, more accountable in terms of security measures for small businesses.
Yeah, here it is. It's right here. And interestingly, we didn't realize it at the time, but at Right of Boom, we had Executive Director Wales of CISA, I'll show that momentarily, literally give hint into this, where he talks about in the interview between John Murchison, myself, that software vendors are going to need to build more security or put security by default into their solutions. It's really interesting. I foresee, a day, like, how we had a watershed moment, for example, with, with Kaseya, right? It was the straw. It wasn't Kaseya. It was the straw that broke the camel's back for cyber insurance, right? If you think about it, everything was leading up. We just talk about SolarWinds, and we had, the Exchange and Pulse Secure, and finally the losses mounted so great. That's when just things flipped. And I think there's going to be a watershed moment in this area as well, where, because of, lack of MFA by default or something of that nature, where I was talking to Matt Lee and Michelle this morning, where we were like, okay, literally we're thinking about real life, where a compromise to a healthcare system, and, there's, disruption to infusion pumps and telemetry, and real deaths occur. And I hate to think like that, but I think there will be a watershed moment where you're gonna, see products, that there's going to be an enforcement that default is full security. And what do you think, Chip? Do you think we could see that at some point?
I'm less hopeful that we're going to see real change unless there's cost of human life involved. People don't seem willing enough, just based upon the fact that there's damage to information and ransomware and business email compromise attacks, things that are less present and tangible than actual, a direct cost that people can relate to because you're losing someone. You just reminded me, Andrew, that where I live, our local hospital network just got ransomware, and it stuns me that they allow for their partners. So, like many hospital systems around the country, they've bought up many physician practices, and in doing so, they're basically buying the liability of that physician practice and how they run their own data management. And in this case, they bought a radiologist. The radiologists still have local storage for patient information and files and radiographs, X-rays, and all of that got ransomwares. And I'm wondering to myself, is it internal IT? Is it an MSP? Is it a combination of both? It probably was both, because the radiologist was fairly small before they got bought by the big conglomerate. How could they let them maintain a server in an office with that information and allow for that hack to occur? Like, it just blew my mind. And I wanted to ask about it again, everyone today, like, are there customers in our ecosystem that are still pushing back from actually moving their data into the cloud where it can be more safely secured? I mean, you're not going to suffer a ransomware attack if your data is sitting in G Drive or in SharePoint. Like, it doesn't happen. You can't encrypt it there. Why are people still doing this?
Well, Chip, I want Ryan to talk because I see him. I really want to, but we're going to have Sunil Yu on in 2 weeks onto the Cyber Call Monday. And, part of it is, I hate to say it, but some of the teachings still where, you think about like a CISSP, and we still talk about the CIA triad, right? Where Sunil Yu is like, he calls it the DIE triad, right? Distributed, immutable, ephemeral, right? So to your point, we're a lot of even our own security teaching, right, is still talking about confidentiality, availability, right? Integrity, availability, which would denote more on-prem or historic type applications where to your point, you're like, why aren't we putting things that are, more ephemeral in nature or distributed in nature, if I understand correctly?
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah, Ryan.
Sure. Yeah, we find customers push back still, about, I'd say 15-20% of our customers push back about moving to the cloud. And you can get ransomware in the cloud. We've had customers that have had ransomware infections to their OneDrive and their SharePoint because OneDrive sitting on someone's computer connected offline to SharePoint, they can do that. And you can roll back 30 days in there.
That's the key. You have a get out of jail free card that you can roll back in revision.
Right,
It takes some work.
That's the challenge, though, is that many customers don't necessarily have long-term retention set up, backup, for example, for their SaaS applications. And so there are some incidences where you get an overlap where you get data that you can't recover in that ecosystem, because of, depending on what level of access that person had that did the ransomware, we have seen that they've encrypted and then purged those backups because they've had access to the system and the account. So then ransomware, and then because once you've got the identity, you can get online and then you can move pretty much wherever you want. When it comes to the SharePoint and OneDrive, are not necessarily secure by default, and people don't necessarily segment SharePoint well enough to not have it spread so quickly or have monitoring set up for that. And so we get pushback in both of those areas relatively often. The ephemeral nature, I think, is a hard thing to pull off because people like tangibility. Business owners like to see and have real expectations of, like, I'm going to see the same thing every time. And so if you're like building ephemeral things, then you have a variable that can be hard to prove the counterpoint to say, when it fails, was it a failure of the system or the provider or the end user? And that becomes the challenge. It becomes a finger pointing contest, and it becomes trying to make it easy to prove where the problem was and who's accountable for that part of the problem. It's the collaboration piece and the accountability piece that I find is from cultural standpoint, the stumbling block.
Well, and it's thorny to describe, and difficult in the event of an incident to actually backtrace, how you need to change your practices so it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I find like that's the hardest part about the process, is that taking all this technical data, synthesizing it, and then put it in the business context of 1 or 2 items that move the customer into the next right thing, using their data that's predictable, that they believe is predictable, because so many business owners are just so used to having very risky business practices and been doing it for years and it's worked out. So why not keep doing it? Because hey, if I've been in business for 20 years and I've never had to worry about, not sharing passwords with my employees, then why take, what's changed? If I haven't been hit, I haven't been hit. I'm gonna keep rolling the dice until I can't. That's what too many business owners are. I'm finding, and I see this a lot in many different verticals. I kind of expect it, say in the construction industry or people that are not formally as technical, but I see it in the legal industry too, where in executives, where executives are the worst offenders. They don't want to do anything to have friction. And the thing is I think we somewhat fail because we allow that friction be the thing that stops us, because there's many things that you can do to eliminate that friction, but it tends to cost a little more. And then we tend to not want to have that conversation saying, oh, you're going to have a better experience if you pay this amount of money. We too often undercut our value and sell short and not even present the right solution to the client because we're too afraid of the sticker shock. Like for example, Microsoft Azure P2 licensing, having conditional access and those kinds of policies makes for a much better experience of, hey, if you're an executive and you don't want to be challenged with MFA when you're in the office, we can do that, but it's going to cost you $2 a month. But if they do it just for the executives, maybe they're fine. If they want to do it for everyone, they're like, no, we don't want to do it for everyone. And then because it's too expensive. And I think that's part of the biggest challenge, is there's these tiny little roadblocks. I find right now the biggest roadblock from your product and the MFA adoption is just the visibility of having to leverage the Graph API, not being able to see which users don't have MFA on. That's a limitation of the licensing and the APIs available from Microsoft that is a stumbling block because it's tied to a cost.
Well, so we're kind of, I know we were not going to probably get Jim mainly to what we wanted to do today, which is absolutely fine. We can pick it up next week. But it's funny you mentioned just what you did, because we always think this is an SMB problem. Well, for those of you that haven't watched, I put it in there with the executive director Wales. We'll give some insights here. But Jim, Chip already mentioned the 32%, little under, but rounded up of that. But Ryan and anybody out there listening to this, if you listen to the interview with executive director Wales, I think it's around minute 29 or something like that. And Michelle has a 1-minute clip, but he's like, this was a lot kind of alarming and surprising to the US government that we found that 30%, only 30% of Microsoft Enterprise Cloud has MFA enabled. Mm-hmm. So it's to your point, Ryan, it's not just us.
Yeah, it's everywhere. Yeah.
It's everywhere.
And I think there's a general distaste for Microsoft in the industry because of the tactics they used over the years. They've gotten better in different areas and they've gotten worse in different areas. But people, I think, just in our industry have gotten kind of upset about the switch over of recurring revenue and licensing models from Microsoft and how complex the licensing structure can be. And then we want to give them the middle finger and be like, we're not going to pay you another $2 to have security. Like, you should be giving us free security. We just spent $50 for your licensing. What do you mean I got to spend another $2 to be able to log into it securely? But then we shoot ourselves in the foot because we're not willing to pay over that $2.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, the good news is that SaaS or MSPs, right? You guys beat the average by 2%. So that's good.
It is good news.
Right? So we just incrementally keep moving that up. But it's funny, a couple of weeks ago, we were getting all the data back from to compile the SASE report. For those that don't know what the SASE report is, it's actually SASI. It stands for SaaS Application Security Insights. And it's the aggregation of all of our data for the last year. We aggregate it, we anonymize it, and we put the information out. So I'm having a conversation with Andrew a couple of weeks ago, and we got some of the data points back. I said, Andrew, guess how many of the small businesses managed by our 700 plus MSPs right now are enabling and using MFA. And Andrew just said 32%. And I couldn't believe it. He guessed it on the nose. And that's true. And it's one of the it's just one of the numbers that we're going to highlight in the SaaS report. I gave Andrew a rough draft of it today. We release it to the world next Thursday. So we can go pretty much in depth, Andrew, if you want, next Thursday and a lot of those numbers.
Yeah, let's do that next week. This was a great call as always. I love it. I love how collaborative this call is getting, and it's awesome, Jim. So
Yeah.
kudos to you all out there in your contributions. I think we almost hit 50 today, Jim.
Yeah, we did 47. Yeah. Yeah. So I've been off I couldn't make the last couple of weeks, and I didn't have it last week. So I know the previous record was 46. So unless we hit 47 one of those other weeks, then today was a record. But
Fantastic.
yeah.
Fantastic.
Jim, we were over 60 both weeks that you weren't here.
Oh, really? Okay. So
I'm just kidding.
You're funny. Well, Jim, we're a little early here, but with 2 minutes, I think it probably makes sense at this point to wrap up and not get into the SASE. We're going to do some preview stuff, but we'll hold off on that. So, Chip, any closing comments or thoughts before we let everybody have the rest of their day?
No, I think we covered a lot of territory on this call. I appreciate all you guys joining every week. I'd encourage you to encourage others that are in the ecosystem. It does seem to take a few weeks to a couple of months for new partners to begin joining this call, and we're trying to help it grow. I think the more voices we get, the more insights we're going to find from each other, and best practices we're going to develop as a group. So please keep coming back.
Definitely. We can't do this without you. So thank you all very much. It's always appreciated. It was cool to see some of our partners in person last week, like Ben Jones and others at Rudda Boom. That's always fun. So,
yeah. And Ben also brought not only the the IT side and security side, but he also brought his former sound sound engineering. So thank you for that, Ben, as well. When our AV guys were screwing up.
And I already told Andrew next year we're sponsoring one of the pre-day sessions. So if we can get this community big enough, like we'll get the entire SASE community right at that pre-day next year. Rudda Boom. That's my goal, Andrew.
That's awesome. Can't wait, Jim. All right, everybody. We'll look forward to next Thursday. And let's see, anything in between. Oh, Michelle, is she still with us real quick? We'll probably put something out about on the 29th. We're going to do a webinar too with Matt Lee. So that should be awesome.
Okay.
All right.
Cool.
Till then, we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.